So today we'll be looking at an image quality test between the Sony A7IV and the DJI Ronin 4D. Now I know it might not seem like a fair comparison being that the Ronin costs more than double the price of the Sony, but we're just looking at image quality alone and they're both full frame cameras. You also might say that the DJI has an advantage because it's a 6K camera and the Sony is a 4K camera. But actually the Sony shoots in 7K and downsamples to 4K. So I fully expect the Sony to have a sharper image still, even though the Ronin is a literal 6K camera. So I have 4 different examples in this video, and we're going to look at skin tones, we're going to look at the low light capabilities, and we're going to look at the sharpness and detail as well as highlight roll off. Since my Ronin 4D has an E-mount on it, I was able to use the exact same lens for both cameras, so the lens is not going to affect the image quality at all in these tests. And I'm using the 35mm SLR Magic Mini Cine lenses for both cameras. So the first image we're going to look at is of this building that gives me an idea of the dynamic range as well as the detail of each one of these cameras. And I think the very first thing I noticed was that on the Ronin 4D, the greens are much more intense. The greens are very saturated, and actually it really did not look like that in real life. It looked more like the Sony's image. It's not really a problem, but it definitely did not look that green. Once we zoom into the image, we can clearly see that the Sony A7IV has a more detailed image than the Ronin 4D, which is what I fully expected, being that it does shoot in 7K. Both cameras are sharper than the camera that I'm shooting on right now, which is the Sony A7IV. So both of these cameras are more than capable of giving you a nice, detailed, sharp image. It's just that the Sony is a little more sharper than the Ronin. There's also no surprise there because these mirrorless cameras have been sharper than cinema cameras for a long time. A cinema camera is really not focused on being the sharpest, crispest camera out there. It's really looking for nice, good image quality, and sharpness is just one aspect of what makes a good image. I'm sure if I used my iPhone, it would be sharper than both of these cameras. So clearly that sharpness is not the primary factor you need to be worrying about, and both these cameras pass the test without any issues. Another thing that we can see with both of these cameras is that neither one of them struggle with dynamic range. This is not the highest dynamic range seen. We're going to try that next, but it does display bright spots and dark areas. So if you look under the bridge, you can still see the details there. If you look into the sky, you still see details there. So it has a nice wide dynamic range, and neither one of these cameras have any issue collecting all of that data. Now moving to the next shot, we see Timmy standing in front of the window in a dark room, which is a very high dynamic range scene, and both of these cameras handle this scene with no issues at all whatsoever. We can see the difference in color science when it comes to the green, like before, the tree being more saturated in the DJI image. But other than that, the dynamic range of both these cameras is outstanding. But one thing that you can see a big difference is the highlight roll off. So if you look at Timmy's skin tone and the way that the light is rolling off of her face, you can see that there's a big difference between the DJI and the Sony when it comes to highlight roll off. And it's much more pleasant to look at. It's much more softer and smoother on the DJI than it is on the Sony. That's part of what you pay for when you give the extra money for a camera like that. It's beyond just the features that the camera comes with. It's also having a real focus on just pure image quality. Now moving on to the next scene, I think it is more apparent when it comes down to the roll off and the color science. Now in this shot, I will say that I forgot to make sure that the Sony was perfectly in focus. But outside of sharpness, we know that the Sony has an advantage. So if we just look at the colors and tones of the image, we can see that there's a pretty noticeable difference between the Ronin and the Sony in this aspect. The DJI shows its advantage again with the highlight roll off. If you look at the truck in both shots, it's just much more intense and pure and clean on the DJI image. So when it comes down to this image, the DJI I think is clearly better in this aspect. Even if you don't like the intensity of the greens, you can always dial that back, but you cannot fix the highlight roll off of the camera. So I definitely give the advantage to the DJI in this image. So moving on to the nighttime image, both of these cameras have dual ISOs, and what that means is as you increase ISO, the image quality decreases, more noise is in the shot. But once you have a second ISO, it's almost like shooting at the first one again, where the image gets clean. So in the aspect of the Sony, at 800 is the base ISO in S-Log3, and as you increase from there, the image gets more noisy. But once you get to 3200 on the A7 IV, it cleans up again. And the Ronin has the same feature as well. So both of these cameras are their native second ISO. Now Sony has been great with low light performance for a very long time, so it's no surprise here that the A7 IV does do better in low light, even though the Ronin is not doing bad at all whatsoever. It's just that it has a little more noise in it than the A7 IV, but neither one of these cameras are struggling when it comes to low light situations. It's just really a difference in colors here. The greens on the Sony, I think, came out a little more accurate when it comes to the neon signs than the Ronin. Even though the Ronin still looks good, it's just very intensely green. But like I said before, you can turn it down. The reds on the Sony, however, look pretty bad. It looked nothing like that in real life, and much more like what it did on the Ronin image. You can also see the chase sign in the background is bluer on the Ronin. So it seems that the Ronin has just more intense colors than the Sony does, which may or may not be something that you like, but it is something that is easily adjustable. I think the biggest takeaways from this test is that the Sony A7 IV gives you a lot for the money that you pay for it. And I think that the Ronin 4D shows that it's not just an overpriced camera, that you're actually getting what you're paying for when you step up to a camera like the Ronin 4D. I will be doing a full review on the Ronin 4D, so if you have any questions about that camera, please leave them down below. I'm going to compare it to the Red Komodo, which is the closest price actual cinema camera that I can think of to compare it to, so you can really see that what the actual image quality looks like if you just ignore all of the features that come with it, because it's more than just a camera with a built-in gimbal, stabilizer, fourth axis thing. It's a really nice camera. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you guys in the next one.